Women faced rough discrimination against men up until they started to take a stand for equal rights in the late 1800s, launching the women's suffrage movement. Various women and associations such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and the National Women's Suffrage Association played a pivotal role in women gaining suffrage.
A huge start in the women's suffrage movement was the first Women's Right Convention held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848 by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was a very significant activist in the women's suffrage movement. Stanton declared a draft of independence and later petitioned Congress to include women in the provisions of the 14th and 15th Amendments. Soon after, Stanton teamed up with one of the most powerful women's rights activists, Susan B. Anthony.
She was a great inspirational leader. She rallied hundreds of thousands of women.
Susan B. Anthony changed the course of history for women in the United States.
At the beginning of her career, of her dedication to women's rights, she was much despised.
Her arrest for voting in the 1872 presidential election and eventual trial paved the way for women's political rights.
One of the things she brought to the women's movement was a tremendous faith.
Susan B. Anthony was born in 1820 in Adams, Massachusetts. She was from a tight-knit Quaker family who believed in education.
In the Quaker meeting house, men and women spoke equally. And so Susan B. Anthony thought that that's the way it was everywhere.
The reality was, most women were uneducated, could not own property, had few legal rights, and were subservient to men. And Susan B. Anthony wanted equal rights under the law for both sexes. Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the architect of the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, and the duo teamed up.
They were responsible for every right we have as women today.
Stanton had the sort of intellectual vision. She had the way with words. And Anthony had from the beginning the vision of what it meant to build a movement.
It was 1872 that Anthony caused a national sensation when she voted in a presidential election illegally. Her trial had an all-male jury, and Anthony was not permitted to speak on her own defense.
The trial was rigged. Her vote didn't count, but she got great publicity value out of it.
Anthony was fined $100, which she never paid. She did, however, continue to spread the word on women's rights throughout the U.S. and Europe.
She appeared in front of every Congress from 1869 until 1906, the year she died.
Women were finally given the right to vote in 1920, 16 years after Susan B. Anthony died.
I think that every February 15th, women in this country should recognize that as Susan B. Anthony's birthday, and just for a second, say thank you.
Stanton and Anthony created the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869, which played an influential role in changing federal law and opposing the 15th Amendment because of its exclusion of women's voting rights. The NWSA then issued an appeal for a 16th Amendment to Congress in 1876. For the next 20 years, this association focused on gaining women the right to vote in every state in America. The NWSA had managing problems and a lack of coordination, which limited its success. Despite its difficulties, it was able to help women in Washington, California, Arizona, Kansas, and Oregon gain voting rights.
Another major group that had a great impact on the women's suffrage movement was the American Women's Suffrage Association, created by Lucy Stone in 1878. The AWSA had an advantage over the NWSA. For one, it was larger than the NWSA. It was also better funded. The only drawback of this association was that it only had a regional reach.
Establishment of the National American Women's Suffrage Association was a major turning point in the women's suffrage movement. It was formed by combining the NWSA and AWSA in 1890, and the leaders were Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. To further intensify their protesting, the NWSA helped launch campaigns for the Women's Suffrage Parade in Washington, D.C. on March 13, 1913. Inez Milholland led the march in all white on horseback. The parade helped to persuade Congress and America as a whole to be in favor of women gaining suffrage.
After several decades of protesting, lobbying, and suffering through brutal discrimination, women finally achieved their goal. On June 4, 1919, Congress passed the 19th Amendment and ratified it on August 18, 1920, finally giving women the right to vote. Women wouldn't have the right of suffrage as they do today without the responsibility and persistence of women such as Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucy Stone.